Thank you very much, Your Excellency, the President of the Federal Republic of Germany. At this point in time, it is my honor and privilege to call on the Speaker of the House of Representatives of the Federal Republic of Nigeria to respond to Mr. President's address. Your Excellency, the Speaker, please.
Your Excellency, the President of the Federal Republic of Germany, Mr. Köhler. Your Excellency, the Speaker of the House of Representatives and President, Honorable Committee Chairman of the House of Reps, Minister of Justice and Attorney General of the Federation, Your Excellency, the German Ambassadors of Nigeria, members of the German Parliament here present, if any, Secretary of Foreign Affairs of Germany, members of the press, encouraged members of the press, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. If the President of the Federal Republic of Germany doesn't mind, I will respond on behalf of our team. Okay? But we're aware of the balance between Germany and Nigeria. It is centered on issues of collaboration in conflict resolution in Africa, immigration and development, collaboration in development in Niger Delta, cooperation in international organizations, and the fight against economic crime. The figures from Germany with Nigeria, I would reiterate here. Germany is the 5th supplier of goods to Nigeria after China, US, Belgium, and the United Kingdom. Germany has the 7th largest, or rather is the 7th largest importer of Nigerian products in 2007. Nigeria ranks Germany's 62nd trading partner for exports and 58th for imports. About 50 German companies operate in Nigeria, including Julius Berger, Siemens, and Chrysler, who was proposed to establish an assembly plant in Nigeria. Regrettably, however, German direct investment in Nigeria has been on the decline since 2001, which is about $94 million to, well, 94 million euros now. And it used to be 219 million euros in 2001. 94 million euros in 2006 figure, while 2001 figure is 298 million euros. I don't quite understand that, because since democracy is supposed to bring about a trade partnership, but in our situation it's been a reduction in the last 7 years. We also acknowledge that the concern about instability as in growth in German investment in Nigeria. We therefore wish to reassure investors that concerted effort is being made to restore peace and fast-track development in Niger Delta region. The recent inauguration of the Presidential Technical Committee and creation of the Ministry of Niger Delta clearly indicates government's preparedness to resolve all crises and unrest in the region, particularly okay. Well, however, I would want to talk more on one of the concerns of the Parliament, and reference to your introduction and the contributions of Parliament to governance in Nigeria and indeed Africa, and how the German government could support our situation. First, I have a situation in Nigeria whereby only 20% of members of the legislature are returned during elections, which basically means that if you build capacity in the legislature, in 3 years' time, of some level of education capacity building, you would lose 80% of those members. And therefore we go back to square one when the new government comes in. What that means is that we lack the capacity to investigate, to perform our oversight functions or representative functions as states for legislatures by error of omission or commission would perhaps not be held accountable accordingly. Once you cannot hold the executive accountable, absolute power corrupts. And that would be the situation in Nigeria, probably the situation with most of developing nations as well. So it's not new to us. So what we need to do is to find some level of continuity in Parliament to create stability to the executive government and therefore give us growth, instead of the antagonizing nature that we've had for the last 9 years, which of course affects budgeting, affects implementation, affects growth. In the Nigerian context this year, since we became a legislation about a year ago, we came up with a new system that we call input, output, outcome, which basically means that the budget is an input of every one of us. Executive, legislature, non-government organizations, interested parties. The output comes when funds are released for projects to be performed, or when funds are released for government to run on a recurrent level. However, little emphasis has been placed to outcome, which is the bane of African development. And if you do not budget according to outcomes, you will not get the desired outcomes, and therefore development. And the outcomes may not necessarily be in the year of the budget itself. So that's where the term of medium-term expenditure or revenue profiles comes into being. However, has placed more emphasis on outcomes. We're trying to run a system of performance indicators that show us some level of corporate governance, that we will not finance the budget unless we see the desired outcomes coming out in the precise quarters that are meant to come out. Therefore, for example, we have a problem with power in Nigeria. About 16 billion was discovered to have been spent. $16 billion was discovered to be spent on power generation, transmission, and whatever you would call it in the last 10 years, power distribution in the last 10 years. We're very little to show for it. But we think that if we had followed the system of budget implementation according to the desired outcomes 10 years ago, we would have seen where we're going wrong and we would have stopped the funding. And if we stop the funding, we correct ourselves and make sure the funds are now appropriated accordingly. Maybe today we'll have a power supply. So what we're saying is this. We're looking at the executive 7-point agenda and working together with the executive. One of the agenda is providing power. Okay, we now say, if you want to provide power, how much money has been spent on power in the last 10 years? What went wrong? So we perform our oversight and investigative powers. We found out 16 billion has been spent, although there were so many discrepancies in the figures. And we now realize exactly what has happened to those power projects and why we do not have power. So if the executive wants to spend, like they're proposing $5.5 billion on power again, we know exactly what has gone wrong, we know when to ask questions and when to ask questions. So nobody will come back in 10 years' time and say, we've wasted enough $5.5 billion. This is where we are. So our probes into investigations to the power sector is not particularly to send anyone to jail. That's not our job. That's the job of the executive to look at our reports and recommendations. But our job is to make sure it never happens again. And we're going to do that. While we're doing that, of course, we're not making many friends. You know that quite a lot of Nigerian companies and probably German companies were involved in power project businesses in the last 10 years as well. Some of them may be indicted, some of them may not be. The report has not been considered by Parliament. When it does, we'll consider them with all sense of fair play and we will move forward as a nation. While we're doing all those things, we also know that yes, we will come under some level of attack in the media, through NGOs, through whatever means necessary by these people. In the areas of budget again, when we came into the leadership last year, again through this level of corporate governance, and the budget proposal was brought to the National Assembly by President Mari, there was a heading in that budget which talks about unspent funds, and we saw a figure of 21 billion naira, which is equivalent to about $140 million, $150 million. So the Finance Committee Chair is there. We gave him a directive that he should go and look into the accounts of unspent funds. A month later, we got a figure of 450 billion naira, which meant equivalent of about $3.9 billion or $4 billion. And that was a figure that was actually imputed into the budget, not $150 million. So you now ask yourself, the difference between $150 million and $4.4 billion. And imagine what happened to that money the year before, or the year before that, and so on before we started asking questions based on this simple thesis of input, output, outcome. We're proud to tell you this year that in the President's yearly announcement, October 1st independence announcement, the President acknowledged a figure of 400 billion naira unspent for in this year's budgeting alone, which means that the system is working. We're moving forward. And this money will now be captured in subsequent years. Again, when you do this, you will not make friends with those who are making something out of this fund before. Again, we also directed the Finance Chairman of the House of Representatives to look at revenue-generated funds, because we have this problem in Niger Delta whereby Nigerians believe that 80-something or 90% of Nigeria's income comes from the Niger Delta. But if you look inwards and look at the revenue-generated agencies and the funds they're supposed to generate for Nigeria, you will find out that 90% of Nigeria's money does not come from the Niger Delta. If only those funds from the generating agencies are remitted into the treasury. Here's a figure of about 3 trillion naira, equivalent to about $25 billion, which has not been remitted into account in the last 5 years. These are the leakages that Parliament can block. If we have the capacity and the knowledge and the continuity in governments to stay in government to make sure that we can ask questions about these funds. Imagine an aid from Germany or United States or UK, European Union, of equivalent of about maybe, what, $500 million a year to assist Nigeria for projects on HIV, AIDS, or women development, or MDGs, and the rest of it. $500 million, maybe $1 billion. Whereas if we plug the holes by building capacity in the parliament to ask the right questions, we can save $24 billion there, we can save $16 billion there, we can save all these monies. So we need parliament to develop. And that is where you should pay emphasis on. The emphasis on investigation. Now, going back to Niger Delta, we also looked at the figures there. The chairman of the committee on Niger Delta is not here. We also set up, the deputy chair is there. We also set up another ad hoc committee to look at exactly what has happened to funds in the Niger Delta and why we have this unrest. And it's quite simple what we find it. It's not rocket science. You find out that a particular state in the Niger Delta, out of the 36 states, earns more revenue from the Nigerian treasury than the entire northeastern zone of Nigeria, which is about 7 states. Yet, 6 states. You now ask yourself, what is happening to the money in the Niger Delta, spent by Niger Deltas, on Niger Deltas, at the local government level, at the state level? You ask yourself. It's not a federal problem anymore. And you ask yourself, how come the state assemblies are not asking state executives what is happening with the money? It's not a Niger Delta phenomenon again, it's a Nigerian problem. So capacity needs to be built at the national level, for legislature, and at the state level, and indeed the local government level, because those are the people who spend roughly about 45 to 50% of Nigerians' funds anyway, not the federal government. And those are the funds that affect the day-to-day living of every single Nigerian at the local level. So that's where capacity must be put on, expanded, and knowledge driven. Again on the Niger Delta. Ask yourself, truly what is happening with this one? If the State Assembly are not asking questions, we should be asking questions. Then again, I should slow down? Well, I'll also add to this. Again, there was a problem with security. A security problem in Nigeria as far as companies who were doing the investments in the energy sector were concerned, and indeed even Julius Berger, a German company as well. Kidnappings and the rest of it. You know, ask yourself, what has happened to security administrators in Nigeria? But at the same time, that this will happen until a month ago, Nigeria people have never participated at the highest level in governance like they do now. The Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria is from Nigeria, which means at the highest level of governance, politically, Nigerians are involved when they're performing. Until about a month ago, the Chief of Army Staff, the Chief of Defense Staff, the Inspector General of Police of the Federal Republic of all these 3 key security officers all come from the Niger Delta. And Chief of Defense Staff as well. Until a month ago, all of them were from Niger Delta. So how come the whole place is blowing up? Today, the Chief of Defense Staff is from the Niger Delta. The IG Police is from the Niger Delta. The Minister for Petroleum is from the Niger Delta. The head of the Niger Delta Commission is from the Niger Delta. Head of Civil Service, Niger Delta. Vice President, the whole thing is in the Niger Delta. So what's happening? Somebody should start asking questions, somebody should be held accountable. Now, Nigeria is paying attention to Niger Delta. That's the point I was trying to put on mind. We're paying full attention to it, and it seems that the situation over there is beginning to become more reasonable and more sensible. And we'll continue to push that agenda. I will continue to support the President's executive, Umaru Musiya's agenda in Niger Delta, to continue to support that, to make sure that, look, this is not only a Niger Delta problem, it's a Nigerian problem, it's an African problem. When they did the judiciary, are paying fullest attention to make sure that this is in the front burner and we're dealing with it. Our job, after all these investigations, after considering the reports, is to come up with the necessary legislation that will make sure that these things will never happen again. That is our resolve, that is our plan, that's what we need to support for, legislature, for the executive.